Hilchis Mikvaos Perek Chamishi. So here in the next two prokim, the Rambam is going to discuss Kama Pratim and Tnoim in the psul of the Shleish Lugamayim Shuvim that passes a mikvah. Perek Chamishi. Mikveh shenofel elov Shleish Lugamayim Shuvim Mikel Yechod a Mishnayim Shleish Kelim. So then it's Mitzdarfen. Aber v'hu sheyaschel Hasheni actually pasuk Harishin. So it's two Tnoim. First of all, it has to be from the maximum 3 kelim. Could be 1, 2, or 3. The maximum is 3 kelim, and also that the 3 kelim shouldn't be poured. In other words, you pour 1 kelim, then you mafsik, and then pour the second keli. The second keli has to start flowing before the first keli finished. Now that is it. The third has to start before the second keli finishes. However, me'arba kelim, if it's from 4 kelim, so it's aim starfen even if they did it together. But lepel, the max could be 3 kelim, and they have to be poured. There can't be a hefsek in the pouring. Amedvar mamurim that we're saying this tonight, that in order to passel it, it has to be dafka from 3 kelim, and also that it has to be together. In other words, there shouldn't be a hefsek from one to the other. The second should start before the first finishes. Amedvar mamurim bizman shalei nischam l'rabis. Whereas you poured the water into the mikveh, but there was no intention that you're trying to make the mikveh bigger, more water. Aval in nischavan l'rabis is mea mikveh. Your intent was beferish, that you want there should be more water there in the mikveh, so eventually there should be a bigger mikveh, and therefore if water comes out, so you should still have water left. Nischavan l'rabis is mea mikveh. So then afilu nafal mishkol dina b'chol shana. Even if your intention, even lepel, you added a very small amount, a mishkol dinner b'chol shana is mitzdaref l'shleish lugim. It's mitzdaref l'shleish lugim. So b'kitzur, so there's a din that if stamazeh you pour the water in, so it has to be the maximum 3 kelim, and the 3 kelim have to be done with each other. Masha'enkein, if you pour it in with the intention l'rabes, so then even if mishkol dinner b'chol shana is also b'seder. Now, that's a lashon mishnah that it says nischavan l'rabes. So in Shulchan Aruch it says nischavan l'rabes means when I intended of pouring all shleish lugim in. So if let's say a person has an intention of pouring all shleish lugim in, even though there was a hefsek, but as long as l'chatchila when he started pouring, he meant to pour all shleish lugim in, so that's also possible. That's how it says in Shulchan Aruch. Masha'enkin and Rambam it doesn't say that. And the Rambam says not the issue whether I intended to pour all shleish lugim in. And intention is whether or not my intention is, why am I pouring the water? Am I pouring the water that there should be a bigger mikveh, or I'm pouring the water stamazeh for some other reason, or the water is falling in. But I'll call upon him, the issue is what's the purpose of pouring the water in? And brought down the Shulchan Aruch, you're supposed to be the Shach brings you should be machmer both days. In other words, that we're talking about, according to the Rambam, if you're nischaven to be mesif in the mayim, that's the reason that causes that there shouldn't be this din of the hagbala of shleish lugim mayim shuvim, as long as your intention of being mesif the mayim. So memela, even if nafal mishkol dinner b'chol shana, even if you had no intention of doing 3 lugim, and according to the other shita, it's fakir. It doesn't have to be that lahisav hamayim. As long as your intention is to pour all shleish lugim, so it's already a psul. So l'halacha yemachmer both ways. That either way it's a psul. Then the Ram continues. This din that shleish lugim shuvim passes a mikvah is ben shekodma shuvim misaksherim. So in other words, first there was mayim shuvim, and in the mayim shuvim you poured in the ksherim. So those ksherim become possible because they fell into mayim shuvim. And ben shekodma aksherim sashuvim, the shuvim fell into the ksherim. Shenaflu shteim keachas. So kiven shenaflu shleish lugim shuvim l'teich arboim so. So in other words, that the 3 lugim fell into arboim so. I mean, if it falls into mamish arboim so it doesn't pass. So you add that kredim shenaflu be arboim so. You have to understand what's the chiddush over here. In other words, the point is that the water fell into the mikveh before there was arboim so. Eile pachas marbo, or still no arboim so, is either a way is not nifsal akel v'nasa shov. So the din is that if mayim shuvim falls into a mikveh and there's no arboim so it becomes puzzle and becomes the whole mayim becomes a din of shov. And al derech zeh, if there was mayim shuvim before the water falls in, so also so the water that falls in also has a din of shov. Now the ma'aseh is that the Ramah brings an argument between achreinim. What's this din? This din that we learned before that in order to make the psul, it has to be only 3 kelim, and it has to be the 3 kelim should be poured together, not with a hefsek. The chura that din bepashtos is only when you're pouring Mayim Shuvim into Mayim Ksherim. So the question is, when do these Mayim Shuvim passel, the Mayim Ksherim, only on these Tnoim? Masha'engen, if you poured Mayim Shuvim, there was nothing in the mikveh. You just poured in Mayim Shuvim. And then you pour in Mayim Ksherim into those Mayim Shuvim. So the pashtus is there's no difference how the Mayim Shuvim got into the mikveh, whether they got a mikveh basachas or they got into a mikveh from 4 kelim and there was hefsekim. The pale is that right now you have a matzav of Mayim Shuvim in the mikveh, and in that mikveh with Mayim Shuvim you're pouring in Mayim Ksherim. So the pashtus, those Mayim Ksherim become puzzle. That's the pashtus, I think, the Aruch HaShulchan Nemzon b'pshitus. He brings that others argue and they taina that since the Rambam behemshel to this halacha in the beginning of the halacha writes this din of ben shekod mashuvim saksherim, ben shekod saksherim esashuvim, so it comes out that the din that he said before that it has to be dafka from 3 kelim and together is also going on this ben shekod mashuvim, which is a davar mechudesh, because the pashtus, the seichel, the svara, the pashtus would say that once the shuvim are in the mikveh and there's nothing else there. So that's the matzav, and now when you pour in Mayim Ksherim, so the Mayim Ksherim are going into Mayim Shuvim, so it's possible. So the Beis Shekodm is not going on that prat of the din, on the general din of Shleish Luga Mayim Shuvim. Halacha Beis. Shnayim sheitilu zel luga mechza v'zel luga mechza, or that's din number 1, or al derez eva seichet ksusei, someone that squeezes out his ksus, and the higbia, and he picks up the ksus. So the water that's coming out of this garment has a din of mayim shuvim. So even though it's coming from different places, but it's all coming from the same garment, so there's no issue of different kalim. It's all coming from the same garment. And since the way the Kesef Mishnah learns, and you picked up this garment out of the water, so if the garment, part of the garment is still the ksus is still connected to the water, so since the water is the mikvah water, so therefore that's not really considered mayim shuvim because it's water which is connected to mikvah water. So therefore the water that's coming out of the ksus is not a psul. Masha'enkin, if you picked it up, so it has to be like hasechet ksusa and vehigbia, yosechet ksusa and vehigbia, and then the mayim sheba nefum mekemes harbi, or v'chena ma'orem and atzarzur shematul mekemes harbi. So you have like this distributor of water that we learned about that with the finger. And the lapel, the water is coming out from various different holes of the same keli. But since ultimately it's from the same keli, so even though it's coming out from different holes, is also a real pesel. That doesn't have a din of 4 different kelim. It's all the same keli. Now there is it's all coming from the same piece of clothes. Is al kol panim the nachama? What's the din? The chiddush of this din. First of all, we're saying that if 2 people pour one lugam mechza, one lugam mechza, that's also psul of mayim shuvim. That's number 1. And second, we're saying that when you have a beged, and that beged is pouring out into the water, so that the water from that beged is considered mayim shuvim, only on the condition that the beged, you are magbia the beged out of the water, only on the condition you are magbia the beged out of the water, and the fact that the water is coming from different parts of the beged doesn't have a din like it comes from different kelim, and therefore it's also a psul of mayim shuvim. That's the way the Kesef Mishnah learns. Others tanya that l'chure, the Rambam says hasechet ksusei v'higbia. L'chure it should be higbia v'hasechet ksusi. In other words, in other words, first he has to pick up the clothes from the water, and then sechet ksusei. The lashon hasechet ksusei v'higbia. L'chure is not a meduyik dikoloshin. L'chure v'higbia should say before sechet ksusi. So based on that, so there's daily achreinim that say the Shach and others that say that the Rambam is talking about 2 separate cases. There's a case of hasechet ksusei, when a person's actually squeezing out the beged, so that even if part of the beged is connected to the water, so that water that comes out of the beged also has a din of mayim shuvim. This is not like the Kesef Mishnah. And al derech zeh v'higbia, what happens if you didn't squeeze it out? You just picked it up, and then water started flowing out, and gimel lugim fell out, so it's also puzzled. So in other words, it's 2 cases. There's hasechet ksusei, and then there's vehigbia. But that's not the way the Kesef Mishnah learns. Kesef Mishnah learns that it's 1 case, hasechet ksusei, but only on the condition that vehigbia. Halachi gimel. Hamadbil kar a kesef shel er b'mikvah, which is a leather. It's leather, and it has something it could contain. It has a base kibul. B'mikvah sheyesh be arboim soh mechuvanis, and it has exactly arboim soh. Is kiven sheigbias if it's the same in amayim. So when a person, he has a mikvah of arboim soh, and he puts in this karva kesed into the mikvah, and the opening of the karva kesed is towards the top. So now the whole karva kesed goes into the mikveh. When he starts pulling out the karva kesed from the mikveh, so the water which is in the karva kesed starts coming out of the mikveh and has a din of mayim shuvim. Now, if he's going to turn it now over upside down, so it's going to be that if the karva kesed has gimel lugim, so it's going to come out that the gimel lugim are going into a mikveh that doesn't have arboim saw. So mele, the whole mikveh will become puzzled. That's this din. It has arboim saw mechuvanis. So mele, when he starts, if he's going to take it out, so that water is now going to be poured back in to a mikveh that doesn't have arboim saw. It's ketzid yasis. What's the eitzah? Matbilan. He should be matbil the karva kesed, but not take it out with the opening towards the top. So mele, when he's taking it out, that karva kesed will have water in it. Matbilan umailon, and when he takes out the karva kesed, he takes it derech shalem. He takes it out through the bottom. So memela, so the water will never be in this karva kesed and have a din of mayim shuvim. Now that's talking about when you're dealing with a karva kesed, which is a real container. It's leather. It's a leather pouch. We're talking about something that's used as a pillow or whatever, but lepel, it could contain the water. Aval hakupa v'hasak, if we're dealing with a sack, which is made out of goat's hair, or a kupa, which is a basket, which also has a lot of openings in it, mele, the water is flowing in and out, is madbila u'mailon kedarka, meina cheshish, because that's not considered a container of water. When you take the sack out of it, even if there's some water in the sack, or if there's water in the kupa, but that's not considered mayim shuvim, because lepel, the whole kupa, is not something which really contains water. The water just flows straight out. Halacha dalet. Mikveh sheyesh beishalish gumis mimayim shuvim. In the mikveh, there's 3 holes. They're not on the same height. There are 3 holes of mayim shuvim, and lug bechol guma, and then v'naflu l'teichim mayim ksherim. So now, if there was arboim saw of mayim ksherim in this mikveh before it reached the 3rd hole, so basically there was already 40 saw of mayim ksherim, and there's, let's say, maybe only 2 lugim of mayim shuvim, and memela, so the mikveh is a good mikveh. When that mikveh reaches the third guma, so it is already a mikveh of 40 saw. There's no problem of the 3rd guma. That's what we're saying. Im yadua shenafel l'teichi arboim saw mayim ksherim actually yagiu leguma shlishis. So we know for sure that there was 40 saw before it reached the guma shlishis. Is kosher v'im lav pasuk. And the chiddush over here is that even though it's a suffix, and l'chura the whole psul is a psul d'Rabbanan, and l'chura by psul d'Rabbanan, l'chura should say sveika d'Rabbanan l'kula. But over here, it's brought down that since it's not a suffix, it's a suffix because you don't know. It's a suffix because you don't have the cheshbon, or you don't know. So that suffix doesn't go into together of sveika d'Rabbanan l'kula. That's the chiddush over here. It knows, even though normally if it would be be'etzem a suffix, it would take a sveika d'Rabbanan l'kula. But over here, the suffix is because you don't have the cheshbon right. You don't know the cheshbon. You didn't make the cheshbon. So a suffix like that doesn't go into together of sveika d'Rabbanan l'kula. In halacha yud already in Perek Dalet, the last halacha. So over there also the Rambam was speaking about ksherim v'apsulim mekalchen l'teicha mikveh. So also im yadua shenaf l'teicha arbaim somayim ksherim. So then it's kosher. But if it's not yadua, so then it's possible. So over there, the Rambam also l'chura said the same din. That when there's a suffix, maybe there was shleish lugim mayim shuvim before it became memsa, so memela you can't use the mikveh. Halachei. Shnei mikvois. You have 2 mikvois. Ein b'chol echad mem arboim saw. Neither of them have arboim saw, and the diuk is, but together they do have arboim saw. Each one on its own doesn't have arboim saw, but together they do have arboim saw. And v'nafal lezel lugim echza, v'lezel lugim echza. And then v'nisarvu shnei mikvois, and then they became mixed together. So then is harei luksherim. Why? Mipnei sheli nikra al echad mem shemsul, because neither of them became puzzle. In other words, in each one there was only 1.5. So at that point in time, there's not a psul. Now lepel, now when there's 3, there's already arboim saw of mayim sherim. So since when there's 3, there's already arboim saw of mayim sherim. So mele, there was never a shemsul. If the Wataka not be arboim saw of mayim ksherim now when they're combined, so in other words, let's say you would have 18 and 18, and you poured shleisha lugim of mayim shuv, 1.5 lugim of mayim shuvim into 18, and then another 1.5 into 18, and now you pour them together, so now you have 36 plus the shleisha lugim, but lepel you have shleisha lugim of mayim shuvim, and you don't have arboim saw of mayim ksherim, so Wataka be puzzled. The Rambam doesn't say it clearly, but that's how that explained that we're talking about ein b'chol echad mem arboim so, but together they have arboim so. So memela right now there's no psul. Aval mikvah she'ein be'arboim so. If you have a case of mikvah, this is not the case. It's not the case we're saying that they combined it together and then now there's no arboim so. You say l'chatchila mikvah she'ein be'arboim so. You have a mikvah she'ein be'arboim so shenafel l'teichish shleish lugam ma'im shuv. And then v'achar kach this mikvah is netlech l'shnayim. So the churi ketaina now each half doesn't really have shleish lugam ma'im shuvim. And then v'riba ma'im ksherim kol echad mem. And now the churi you have in each one arboim so of ma'im ksherim. So you have arboim so of ma'im ksherim, and you only have a lugam mechza of ma'im psulim. So it's arei l'psulim. Why? Shekol ha-mikvah kula shenifsal is doch k'mayim shuvim u'choshev. Whereas the fact that you divided it does make a difference. The three lugam of ma'im shuvim that fell into the less than arboim so made this whole mikvah into a mikvah psula, like ma'im shuvim. So the fact now that you divided it and now you added ma'im ksherim, that doesn't make a difference. Lepel, that water that you had, which was originally mixed with shleish lugam of ma'im shuvim, became possible, and memela it remains possible. Uki'ilu kol meim of nishavu became. Now from this Rambam is Meduik, which is a whole issue. B'nigeya, what is the din? We have a din that shleish lugam ma'im shuvim passes a mikvah. Now what happens if you have a metzias where you had shleish lugam ma'im shuvim that fell into a mikvah? Mikvah means less than arboim so. When you say a mikvah, it means it's ma'im ksherim for a mikvah, but it's less than arboim so. So you have over there, let's say 39 so of ma'im ksherim, shleish lugam of ma'im psulim, so it all became possible. And now from that mikvah, which all became possible, fell shleisha lugim into another mikvah, which was also less than 40 so. So the deal from this Rambam is that it all became k'mayim shuvim, and it all became k'mayim shuvim, and mele it also passed the mikvah. So the Ravid argues with this nukuda, with this din of the Rambam, that it becomes mamish mayim psulim. But I'll call upon him, the Rambam is saying clearly that the first din is that when there was only 1.5 saw in each one, and then they got combined and they were 40 saw, so then they're kosher. And over here, if there was three lugim in less than 40 saw, so then everything over there became possible. And even when you go ahead and divide it and add more water to it, but nevertheless it remains possible. The Rambam should have said clearly this din that if you have, let's say, 1.5 saw into, like we said before, 18, and 1.5 saw and another 18, and then you combine it, so then it is possible, because lapel now you don't have 40 saw, and you have 3 lugim of ma'im shuvim. The Rambam doesn't say that then, it's like the deal, because the Rambam says, ein b'chol echad mem arboim saw, but together they have arboim saw. It's like sort of bitter, that would have been like a clear, like the opposite of the first din, of the beginning of halacha hey. Halacha vav. Bear shuhumole mayim shuvim. You have a bear which is full of mayim shuvim, and then v'ha'ama nichnesesli. You have a channel of rainwater that's going into this bear. Is nichnesesli. There's water going into this bear which is mole mayim shuvim. V'yetzis mimanu, and then there's water coming out. So you have rainwater going into a bear which originally was filled with mayim shuvim, and now the water is coming out. So la'olam hibe pesule. So the question is, when did this bear have a din of a kosher mikvah? It started off as being mayim shuvim, fully mayim shuvim. Now you had kosher water going into it, so pashtus that's not still kosher, because lapel there's mayim shuvim, gimel lugim of mayim shuvim, but the water is coming out. So la'elam hiba pisule, this bear remains possible. It has a din of mayim shuvim. Acheti choshev, until you make the cheshbon shalei nisheru min hashuvim shahoyu beber shlei shalugim. You have to figure out how much water keeps going in and how much water keeps going out. And lefi cheshbon, you make the ratio of how much water goes out is the percentage. In other words, if let's say there was water coming in and water going out, and the amount of water came in, there was the water in the bear, and then the water came in, and then water came out. So you have to make the percentage. How much of the water that came out was the original water of the bear, and how much the water that came out was from the water that came in. So you have to make it according to the cheshbon of how much water came in, how much water was there originally. And when you say the water that came out, so it goes out according to that percentage. And when you come to the maskana that there's no water left from the original bear that had mayim shuvim, from the original bear that had Mayim Shuvim. There's no Gimel Lugim left of that original bear, according to the Cheshbon of the displacement of this water. So then that water becomes Mayim Ksherim. That's this din. So once we establish that there's no Gimel Lugim of Mayim Shuvim in this, of the original Mayim Shuvim in this bear, so that mikveh, that bear becomes a kosher mikveh. Let's read it again. Bear shumali Mayim Shuvim. You have a bear which is filled with Mayim Shuvim. V'ha'ama nechneses leviyetzis mimenu, and you have a channel of rainwater that's going into the bear and coming out of the bear. Is le'elam hubi pesule. This bear, which was originally filled with Mayim Shuvim, remains possible. Achet tichoshev, until you make a cheshbon. Sheli nisheru min ha'shuvim shehoyu beber shlei shalugim. That from the original shlei shalugim that was the original water in the bear, which was Mayim Shuvim, there's no 3 lugim left there. So in other words, what came out of the bear was much more than the original water of the bear. Because let's say the original water in the water was 40 saw. But Lepil, kosher water kept going in. So even the 40 saw came out of the bear, but not the 40 saw are the 40 saw of the original Mayim Shuvim. It was the 40 saw mixed with the new water that came into the bear. So you have to make a cheshbon, how much water came in and how much water went out. And according to that cheshbon, you could make a cheshbon of how much water still remains from the original water. So once you have that, the original water, there's no shleish lugim left, that's beseder. That's the number 1. Now, l'chur over here, you can ask a question that we just learned that when you have water that goes into Mayim Shuvim, so all of that water becomes puzzle, all of the water becomes puzzle. At Kedekah, we wrote down that from that water goes in shleish lugim into another mikveh that doesn't have memsa, so it also passes it. So l'chur over here, when you have Mayim Ksherim that's going into a bear that has Mayim Shuvim. So l'chur, there's Mayim Ksherim going into a bear that has Mayim Shuvim. So l'chur, that Mayim Ksherim should become puzzle water. So what's going to help that we made the cheshbon? That from the original water, there's no shleish lugim left of the original water, but the new water also became Mayim Psul, because when water mixes with Mayim Shuvim that were 3 lugim, so all the water becomes puzzle. So in Mela, it keeps being puzzle water. So how does it become kosher? That's the kasha which is discussed along arichos in the Achreinim. But the pashas, you have to say that you have to know the Hagdaras Advarim, but in such a case, the Chacham didn't make this chumrah. Whereas normally we say when you have a regular bear, and that bear is, let's say, Mayim Ksherim, and then 3 lugim of Mayim Psulim fall into it, so all of it has a Shem Psul. Mashenkin over here, in this case, when you have this Amas HaMayim that's going through this bear, which is Mayim Shuvim, and it's constantly going in and going out, it's in such a seder of going in and going out, is B'chi Agam, that the Chachamim didn't institute this chumrah that all of the water should have a din of Psulim and Melet should never become kosher. B'chi Agam, when we know that the original Shleish Lugim are out of there, so then it's kosher. That would be l'chura, a good teretz for the first part. Then the next din is also l'chura, the same shayla. Now, further, mikveh shenafu l'teiche Mayim Shuvim v'nifsal. You have a mikveh that had Mayim Shuvim fell in v'nifsal, and v'achar kach riba all of Mayim Ksherim, at shenimtzu haksherim arboim so, is a reim b'psulik. Because l'pel, the water that was there is puzzle, and the Shleish Lugim Mayim Shuvim caused that all the water that was there is puzzle. Ad, sheyetzu kol hamayim shoyi b'teches. So over here, we have this din, that if the original water that was there goes out, and v'yivchesu ha'shu'uvim mishleish lugim, the original water should go out, and there won't be any more water from the original water of shleish lugim. Ketzad. So he gives the case. Mikveh sheyesh be esem so miksham, and then v'nafel l'teches so mayim shuvim. So you have 21 so. V'achar kach hirbol of mayim ksherim, and now there's Mayim Ksherim were added to this bear, is Harei Bepisulis. So this is possible. At Sheyeda, Sheyotzu Mimenu Esim So Shahayu Bei, and also the Chamisha Kabim, V'yesem Irvia Kav, V'leinisha Minakel Shenifsal, Chutz Mipachs Nishleish Lugim. Now the Cheshbon is that we have a So is Gimel Kabim, and a Kav is Daled Lugim. A So is Daled Kabim. A saw is 6 kabim, and a kav is daled lugim. Now this mikveh had 20 saw, and now you added 20 saw of kosher water, and now you added a saw of mayim shuvim. You added a saw of mayim shuvim. A saw means 6 kabim, which each kab has daled lugim. Now we're saying that you added mayim to this mikveh. So no matter how much mayim you'll add to the mikveh, lepel, it's a puzzle of mikveh. The water is puzzle because it became puzzle with the gimel lugim of mayim psulim that puzzled. So now we have 21 saw of mayim psulim. Now how is that mikveh going to become kosher? So the Rambam is saying we have to know that the 21 saw minus, doesn't have to be all 21 saw, minus less than gimel lugim went out. So if 21 saw minus less than gimel lugim went out, so now we know that's what's left is less than gimel lugim of the original water. Now, what's pshat? So you have to have 21 saw minus gimel lugim means 20 saw, plus 5 kav, and plus a quarter of a kav, and a little bit more than a quarter of a kav. In other words, a kav is 4 lugim, so a quarter of a kav is a lug. So you have to have 20 saw goes out, plus 5 kavim, plus a lug, which is a quarter of a kav, and plus a little bit more than a lug. That's the cheshbon. Atchiyeda, let's read again. Atchiyeda, shiyotzi mimenu esim saw shahoyabed, the 20, original 20 saw, and also the chamisha kabim, plus we're talking about for the extra saw, because the saw went in another 5 kabim, and the yoisim mirivia kav, and more than a quarter of a kav, because a quarter of kav has to go out, and then if only a quarter of a kav goes out, so then you're left with exactly 3 lugim, so it has to go out a little bit more than a revia kav. Memela v'lei nishir min hakel shenifsal chutz mipoches mishlei shalugim. And in such a case, it's good. Now over here, we're not talking about over here ma'isa with flowing water. Over here, there was a bear. There was a bear that had 20 saw of kosher water, and then it had a saw of mayim psulim fell into it. So mainly the whole water became puzzle. And now you added mayim ksherim to it, and now we have to make sure that 20 saw plus 5 kabim plus more than a revia of a kav came out. Now over here, be'emes is a kula l'gabi the previous din, because in the previous din, so it's brought down. It's not so clear. The Rambam says the lashon achi yetzu kol ha'mayim shehoyu b'teichei v'yivchesu ha'shlei shalugim mishlei shalugim. So how much it has to be out? Yetzu shiyotzu mimenu. The Rambam says esim so shehoyu b'teichei. The 20 saw shahoyabeh. So does it mean that you have to also make a cheshbon? How much water came in and how much water went out? Memela to make a cheshbon that the original water went out. So the Mefarshim explained that's not the pshat. That over here the pshat is in the case, in the first case of Allah Chavav, you have to make a cheshbon that how much water came in and how much water came out in order to calculate that the original water is not less. There's less than 3 lugim left in the original water. Over here, in that case, in the beginning of Allah Chavav, we're talking about that the whole bear was Mayim Shuvim. So since the whole bear was Mayim Shuvim, you have to calculate that from all the water that went out to make sure that the original water, there's no 3 lugim left. Mashenkan over here, it's not that all the water was Mayim Shuvim. Originally, the water was Behemoth kosher water. And then a saw of Mayim Shuvim went in. And Mamela gave it a din of all of it being Mayim Shuvim. So now you have to have a cheshbon that from this bird came out 20 saw plus 5 kavim plus more than a revia of a kav. And then, even though you didn't make this calculation, it's not the calculation that all the water, the original water went out, but nevertheless it's all kosher. And again, over here we still have the same kasha. That l'chura, why doesn't all the water that goes into the bear now become puzzle? Because since this is puzzle water, why doesn't it become puzzle? So he said this arichos advarim and achreinim. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has a psagan arichos on this din to explain it, but upon him, that is the din. The din is clearly that normally we say the water becomes puzzle, all the water becomes puzzle. Mashenkin over here, in this case, where you have the mikveh, and now the water is coming out of the mikveh, so in the case of the bear shumal in mayim shuvim, you have to make the cheshbon that from the original water, there's no 3 lugim left. Over here, in the case where there was the bear that had 20 saw, and then you have a saw in it, so you don't have to make that cheshbon, but you do have to make a cheshbon that 21 saw minus a little less than 3 lugim came out of this bear. Now there's another eitzah to kasher the mikveh, and that's a pashter eitzah. You have a mikveh, another mikveh of arboim saw of mayim ksherim, v'irvim a mikveh as apostle, and you mix it together with this mikveh. So then it's tiru elu seila, just like if you have a regular kosher mikveh, and on the side you'd have mamish mayim shuvim, not this mikveh, and already mayim shuvim. So it becomes tiru elu seila through ashaka, So one mikveh is kashes the other mikveh. So that is over here. This mikveh that became puzzle because of the shleish lugim mayim shuvim, which puzzled it. So if you'll connect it to a kosher mikveh, so then it'll become kosher. Halacha zayin. Hamasanik esatit litzdodim. You have a mikveh, and that mikveh has mud, and you go ahead and move the mud to the side, and then v'nimshechu mimenu shleisha lugim mikveh. From this mud flows 3 lugim into the mikveh. Is that a kosher? Because the mud doesn't have a din of mayim shuvim. So you never picked it up, and it didn't have a din of shov. You just pushed it to the side. However, if you picked up the tit, and then you put it on the side of the mikveh. In other words, you picked it up and you took it out of the mikveh and you put it on the side of the mikveh. So now that water which is in that tit has a din of mayim shuvim, and then the nimshachim imanu shleish lugim, and from there fell shleish lugim into the mikveh, is harei psulim. So then it is possible. Halacha ches. Gaius ha'over b'makom l'makom. If you have an army that's traveling and they're going through, like they go through a river, and then passing into after they go through the river, they're all wet, and now they go over an area which is, let's say, a place that there's a hole over there, and water drips from them, and it becomes a mikvah. It becomes like a 40 saw mikvah from the water that dripped from this Gaius that we're traveling through. And they all became wet. Gaius or even b'makom l'mekom, or v'chein behema hiveres b'makom l'mekom, v'zolfu b'yideim b'ragleim, and they spritzed with their hands and with their feet shleish lugim l'mikvah. They all went into a mikvah. So the din is that is a kosher because it lepel. It's not mayim shuvim. V'liyeda lafila also mikvah b'tchila is that is a kosher. Whereas ilepel, the first din was that shleish lugim from them fell into the mikvah. That's not considered shleish lugim mayim shuvim. It's not mayim shuvim, even though it fell on their clothes, and it was on their clothes. But lepel was shlei mischaven, and it wasn't something that was considered mayim shuvim, and therefore it's harei kosher. But furthermore, even if a complete mikveh was made out of this water that came through this Gaius or through these behemoths that are traveling, so it's also kosher. Halacha tes mikveh she'ein be'arboim so v'nafel l'teichi pachas mishleish lugim mayim. Now, till now we're learning that there's a psul of shleish lugim mayim shuvim that passes a mikveh if it's no arboim so. Here we're learning that there's a din that even if it's less than shleish lugim mayim, but if it's mayim tmeim, so it also passes a mikveh from being a kosher mikveh. This is the chiddush. The Ravid argues on this din, but the Rambam holds that when you're dealing with mayim shuvim, which are tmeim, even if it's less than shleish lugim, it also passes the mikveh that the mikveh shouldn't be a kosher mikveh. Unless that it was rubble, like we'll soon learn the Hamshach. Halacha tes, nachamo. Mikveh she'ein be'arboim so, v'nafel l'teichei pachas mishleish lugim mayim tmeim she'uvim. So the din is harei kosher l'chala. So lepel, even though this mayim was mayim tmeim, but lepel it becomes bottle in the water that it fell into, and it's not matame the water that it fell into, because the water is mechuber lekarka, and memela doesn't become tummy unless you had kavanah to be matame. So therefore, the water didn't become tummy, and the tummy the water becomes bottle in the main mikveh which was there originally. So therefore, harei kosher lechala, and also letruma, and also a little man yodayim. However, that's the chiddush upsulim lehikavis aleim. But to use it as a mikveh, that's possible. You can't use it as a mikveh. So it's a chiddush that normally we say that we have less than mem saw, and then shleish lugim mayim shuvim fell in. So that becomes possible to use as a mikveh. Here we're saying that if you have less than 40 saw, and less than gimel lugim mayim shuvim fell in, but it was tummy dike water, so then also it's psulim likavis aleim. However, over here there's the eitzah, yardu aleim kshamim, v'rabu aleim. If there's kshamim that came that's more than was there originally, so then it's harei luksherim likavis aleim. Then it becomes kosher for a mikveh. Now, be'emes this din l'chura is only negeya if originally there was in this mikveh more than 20 saw. Whereas l'mashal, if you have a mikveh that's 30 saw, and then 2 lugim of mayim shuvim tmeim fall into it, so the din is that you can't use it as a mikveh. And how could you use it as a mikveh? You could only use it as a mikveh, not if you'll add just 10 saw, but you'll have to add more than 30 saw. You'll have to be rabu alei make shamim. Only then will it become a kosher mikveh. So if it was originally more than, it knows the mayim that became puzzle was more than 20 saw. But Masha'inkin, if we're talking about a mikveh, this mikveh she'ein be'arboim saw would be less than 20 saw, so obviously the mikveh is anyways not going to be kosher unless you're going to be rabu aleim. So Mela, this din that it's puzzle hikavas aleim until rabu aleim l'chura wouldn't be negay. I'm saying this whole din of mikveh she'ein be'arboim saw is puzzle until there'll be rabu aleim is l'chura negay. L'chura, Ram doesn't say it clearly, but l'chura is pashut. That this din is only negeya if we're talking about a mikveh that ain't be'arboim saw, but it has more than 20 saw. Then it's a chiddush of this din. That's din number one. So we're talking about that less than 3 saw fell in, and they were tmeim. So the din is that it's kosher, it's still torah lechala letruma, and for the tilas yadayim. But on the other end, in order to use it as a mikveh, it has to be rabu miksham. Now nafel leteche shleish lugim ma'im shuvim tmeim. Not pachas mishleish lugim, but shleish lugim ma'im shuvim tmeim. So then as harezah, so then it doesn't become bottled. So memela, since you have these shleish lugim which are choshuv, and that's tamei, so therefore harezah pasol lechala or letruma for little many yadayim. So this mikveh water is all pasol. It has a din of tamei, and also psulun likavasolav. You can't use it for a mikveh. And however, yarduk sham v'rabu aleim. Now, if there was yarduk sham v'rabu aleim, so the din is that if you had tamidika water in the karka, and then it was rabuk shamim, so we learned already that those rabuk shamim causes that water should become tar. So therefore, over here also yarduk sham v'rabu aleim is arein ksherin lechala letruma v'litla mem yadayim. So this mikveh becomes now kosher. It becomes kosher. It becomes tar. However, it's still a psulun likavas aleim, because since there was gimel lugim of Maim Shuvim fell in there, so the fact that it's Rabu Aleim doesn't change anything. Ad Shietza Kala Maim Marishenim, Shenasa Kulam Shuvim, the original Maim Marishenim, which all Nasa Kulam Kishuvim has to go out, and only then, V'le Yishar Mehem Elapachas Mishlei Shalugim, like we learned before, that if you had a mikveh that was less than 40 saw, and Gimel Lugim and Maim Shuvim fell into it, so the whole mikveh becomes puzzle. And the only way that it's going to become kosher is by it going out. So we learned before that even if it goes out, if it's lifri cheshbon or not lifri cheshbon, how it goes out. But certainly there's a din that mayim has to go out of the mikveh in order for that mikveh to be a kosher mikveh. Yeah. So we learned about if it was less than gimel lugim and it was tamei, and we also learned about if it was gimel lugim and it was tamei. V'chein mikveh sheyesh be'arboim so chaser dinner. You have a mikveh which is almost arboim so chaser dinner. And v'nafel l'teiche shleisha lugim mayim shuvim tmeim. So it's the same thing. There is a pasal lechala or letruma v'litel mimenu liyadayim, and also upsulun likavas aleim. It's possible to use as a mikvah because lepeil, since it was less than arboim saw, and lepeil shleisha lugim of mayim shuvim fell into it. So mela, so therefore it's possible for a mikvah. And it would be possible for a mikvah even if it wouldn't be tmeim. So. But Masha'inkin, the Tmeim is Negeya, that it's also possible for L'chala L'truma. And it's possible for mikveh, because Shleish Lugim Mayim Shuvim passes for mikveh. Now, Novel L'techi Pochis Mishleish Lugim, if you go into this mikveh, which we're talking about a mikveh, which that's Mem So Chaser Dinner, and Pochis Mishleish Lugim fell in, Afilu kulam tmeim, even if they were all tmeim means side the water that fell into this mikveh. You have a mikveh which is kosher water for a mikveh. How could it be tummy? No, someone tummy touched that water, b'kavana. So that water became tummy. Taka became tummy, but it's not shuvim. Whereas you can have water which is kosher to be used as a mikveh, and memela if you're going to mitzaref more rainwater, so it's going to become a kosher mikveh. But until you're mitzaref, the more rainwater, so right now it's tamidika water. So you have tamidika water that's shuvim, less than shleisha lugim, that fell into kosher mikveh, which was also tamid. And v'achar kach, but it's less than shleisha lugim. V'achar kach nafal l'teche mishkal dinner make shamim she'eshlimei, and now you have 40 saw of make shamim. So then, kshem shetor l'tvila kach tor l'chol davar. So now it becomes a kosher mikveh. It was a mikveh of our boim saw. It was a mikveh of our boim saw chaser dinner. So it wasn't a kosher mikveh. So the pale, because of that, it could become tummy. It could become tummy. And now mayim she'uvim less than shleisha lugim fell in there, which was also tummy. So, but lepel was less than 40 saw. It was less than 3 saw. And now the amount of that was missing, the pachas, the dinner, fell into the mikvah. So now you have a mikvah of memsa. Now once you have a mikvah of memsa, so Mamela, mikvah of memsa doesn't become tummy. So Mamela, the tumah that it had before also goes off. Everything goes off. It becomes a kosher mikvah. No, we had a mikvah that was be'emes a kosher mikvah, but not kosher mikvah. It was a mikvah that was kosher for mikvah water. But the problem was that it was missing a dinner to be a memsa. And now that dinner came in. So even though in the middle it became tummy, there was tummy dika water fell in, whatever. And at that point in time, obviously you weren't able to use it for anything. But once it becomes a kosher mikvah, notice the chiddush over here is that you had tummy dika water and kosher dika, but it was kosher. It wasn't mayim shuvim. It was kosher for a mikvah. So at that point in time, when it wasn't a mikvah yet, so it became tummy. Mashenkin, once it becomes a mikvah, so now it becomes a mikvah. So once it becomes a mikvah, so the tumah also goes off. Now the shaila over here is that l'chura, since it wasn't memsa, and we learned before that when there's less than 3 saw of mayim shuvim, but they're tamei, so it invalidates the whole mikvah li'kavis aleim until it will be rabu aleim make shamim, or until then you can't use it for a mikvah. So how does it work over here? Over here, l'chura, it was nafel l'techi pachas mishtei shalugim. When I feel kulan tmeim, so l'chura that's also tamei. And nevertheless, when you add a mishkal dinner of make shamim, so then it becomes a kosher mikveh. It becomes Torah l'tfila, and it's Torah l'chol davar. So that leads beer. L'chura, where does that din get lost? Unless you say that because since it was mamish, kimat, memsa, so the previous din doesn't apply. That's they try to answer that. It's not such a simple answer. In other words, before we learned clearly that when you had a mikveh that was pachas mimemsa and less than shleish lugim came in that were tamei, so that causes that it's not kosher to use for a mikveh unless it was rabu aleim meksham. So over here we have that same case. You have a mikveh that's less than 40 saw, it's chassid dinner, and lepel water that's tmeim came into it, mayim shuvim that's tmeim came into it, and now we're saying that as soon as the sheer dinner goes into the mikveh, everything becomes kosher. Where is lost that din that has to be rabu aleim meksham?